"You're under arrest for false personation of federal inspector," my wife announced to the whole place even as my military badge hung around my collar. She thought she'd succeeded. She had no clue who I really was. Before I tell you how a Christmas dinner turned into the most humiliating and revealing night of my life, do me a quick favor, stay with me till the end, and drop a comment about where you're listening from. It helps these stories reach people who might need them more than they realize. My name is Daniel Mercer. I was 37 that winter. And the woman who snapped handcuffs around my wrist in front of my entire family wasn't a stranger, or an enemy, it was my wife. The room went silent the moment Emily said those words. Forks froze halfway to mouths. A glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered near the fireplace, but no one reacted. All eyes were on me. On the badge hanging from my collar. On Emily, standing rigid in her police uniform, jaw set like she was finally winning a long overdue battle. She looked proud. Victorious. I felt calm. Emily had always believed I was hiding something. Not because I gave her reasons to doubt my loyalty, but because I refused to give her details. In her world, authority came from transparency, rank, and public acknowledgement. In mine, survival depended on silence. The badge around my neck wasn't decorative. It wasn't stolen. And it definitely wasn't fake. But Emily had already decided her version of the truth. For months, she said loudly, pacing the dining room like a prosecutor, "I've been patient. I've listened to excuses. I've watched you disappear, lie by omission, and flash credentials you refuse to explain. Tonight, that ends." She reached into her coat and pulled out a thick folder, slamming it onto the table. False federal identification. Unauthorized possession of restricted insignia. Possible impersonation of a federal inspector. She looked at our guests, my mother, her parents, my grandmother Ruth, a couple of cousins, and said, "I'm sorry you have to see this. But the law comes before family." My mother's face collapsed into disappointment. Not shock. Disappointment. I recognized that look. I'd worn it my entire life. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't try to explain. That irritated Emily more than anything else. "Say something," she snapped. "Defend yourself." I met her eyes. "Are you sure you want to do this here?" She took that as fear. "Yes," she said sharply. "I'm done being made a fool of." She stepped forward and cuffed my right wrist. The metallic click echoed through the room. My grandmother gasped. "Emily." "Stay out of this," Emily said, not even turning. "He did this to himself." She pulled my other arm back harder than necessary and snapped the second cuff shut. And just like that, I was under arrest in my grandmother's living room, surrounded by Christmas decorations and people who were already deciding I deserved it. What none of them knew, what Emily couldn't possibly have known, was that the moment she restrained me, she triggered a federal escalation protocol she didn't even know existed. But to understand how we got there, you have to understand our marriage. Emily and I met 8 years earlier. She was a patrol officer then, driven, ambitious, deeply proud of the badge she wore. She believed order came from rules and that respect was earned by being seen enforcing them. I admired that about her. Truly. I just lived in a world where rules were layered, identities were compartmentalized, and being seen was often the most dangerous thing you could be. When we married, I told her my work was federal, classified, and non-discussable. She agreed, at first. But as her career advanced, her patience shrank. She made detective. Then lieutenant. Every promotion came with sharper questions. "Why can't I verify your clearance? Why doesn't your agency show up in standard databases? Why does your badge look different?" I always gave the same answer. "You don't have the clearance to see it." That answer didn't reassure her. It offended her. To Emily, authority meant inclusion. If she couldn't access something, she assumed it didn't exist, or worse, that it was illegal. And somewhere along the way, suspicion turned into resentment. That Christmas dinner wasn't spontaneous. It was planned. I realized that the moment I'd arrived in Ridgehaven earlier that evening and noticed an unmarked cruiser parked down the street. Then another. And a man pretending to check his phone near the corner, watching the house. Emily hadn't invited me home for the holidays. She'd set a stage. Ruth, my grandmother, had hugged me tightly at the door and whispered, "Be careful, Danny. She's convinced herself of something." I should have left then. But part of me needed this confrontation. Needed it to end one way or another. Back in the dining room, Emily read aloud from the folder, documents, photos, half-understood reports. Surveillance shots of me entering secure buildings. Equipment deliveries labeled with codes she couldn't decipher. Financial transfers that looked suspicious if you didn't understand how federal black budgets worked. To her, it all pointed to one thing. A fraud. "You think you're smarter than everyone," she said, voice shaking now. "You think flashing a badge makes you untouchable." I finally spoke. "You're out of your jurisdiction." That gave her pause. Excuse me? These allegations, I said evenly, aren't handled by local law enforcement. She laughed. Listen to you. Still pretending. She turned to the room. I called my captain. Backup is outside. He'll be here any minute. That was when I knew the line had been crossed. I shifted my wrist slightly and pressed my thumb against the inside of my belt. 3 seconds, steady pressure. The emergency beacon activated silently. A secure signal. Encrypted. Routed through satellites. Direct to Fort Ashland. Emily dragged me toward the front door, narrating every step like she was already rehearsing her report. As we stepped onto the porch, the night air cold against my face, I glanced down the street. Headlights appeared at the far end. Not police cruisers. Black SUVs. Moving fast. Emily didn't notice yet. She was too busy believing she'd finally exposed me. And she had no idea that in less than 2 minutes, her captain would arrive, not to back her up, but to salute me. And that was when everything she thought she knew about me, and herself, was about to collapse. The first SUV stopped so abruptly that the gravel sprayed across my grandmother's lawn. The second slid in behind it, perfectly aligned, engines idling with a low, controlled hum that didn't belong in a quiet town like Ridgehaven. Emily finally noticed. What the hell, she muttered, tightening her grip on my arm. Her captain's cruiser pulled in moments later, lights flashing red and blue, slicing through the darkness. Captain Andrew Holt stepped out, straightening his jacket as he walked toward us with quick, authoritative strides. Emily's shoulders squared in relief. Captain, she called out. I've got him. False personation of a federal inspector. Evidence is inside. Captain Holt slowed when he got close enough to really look at me. At the badge hanging around my neck. At the cuffs. At my face. Everything in his expression changed. He stopped walking. Emily frowned. Sir? He didn't answer her. He raised his hand. And he saluted. It was sharp. Crisp. Instinctive. The kind of salute that comes from muscle memory and deep institutional understanding. Superintendent Mercer, he said clearly. We received the alert. Are you secure? The night went completely still. Emily's mouth opened, but no sound came out. My grandmother gasped behind us. Someone inside the house started crying. Yes, Captain, I said calmly. I am now. Holt's jaw tightened as he took in the scene. He turned to Emily, his voice suddenly colder than I'd ever heard it. Officer Mercer, he said. Step away from him. Now. Emily laughed once, hysterically. Sir, this man is under arrest. He's impersonating. Uncuff him, Holt snapped. That's an order. She froze. Sir, with respect, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, Holt said. And if you don't remove those cuffs immediately, you will be the one detained. Her hand shook as she reached for the key. Behind Holt, the doors of the SUVs opened. Men and women in dark federal gear moved with practiced efficiency, forming a perimeter around the house, the street, the vehicles. They weren't aggressive. They didn't need to be. Their presence alone shifted the gravity of the moment. Emily unlocked the cuffs. The metal fell away from my wrists. I rubbed them slowly, feeling circulation return, and stepped forward. Holt lowered his salute but didn't relax. Sir, Fort Ashland confirmed your distress signal. Federal strategic oversight has assumed control of the scene. I nodded. Thank you. Emily stared at me like she was looking at a stranger wearing my face. You're a superintendent, she whispered. That's not possible. You said? I said you didn't have clearance, I replied. That was the truth. Her knees buckled slightly, and Holt caught her arm before she fell. He said quietly, you're going to want to sit down. She didn't. She couldn't. The federal lead stepped forward and identified himself, voice calm, clipped, precise. He began issuing instructions, to Holt, to the deputies, to agents who were already cataloging the folder Emily had prepared. Those documents, the agent said, lifting one page with gloved fingers, contain classified markings. How did you obtain them? Emily looked at me desperately. Daniel, tell them. Tell them I didn't mean. Answer the question, the agent said. Her voice cracked. I accessed databases. I followed leads. I was trying to protect. By conducting an unauthorized investigation into a federal official, the agent finished. Using departmental resources. Involving civilians. And making an arrest outside your jurisdiction. Holt looked like he'd been punched. Emily's father stumbled out onto the porch. This has to be a mistake, he said. My daughter wouldn't. She already did, Holt said quietly. They moved Emily away from me then, not roughly, but firmly. Another agent read her rights. Holt stood stiffly to the side, his face pale, eyes fixed on the ground. I turned back toward the house. My mother stood just inside the doorway, staring at me like she'd never seen me before. Not pride. Not relief. Fear. You let this happen, she said faintly. You could have stopped her. I met her gaze steadily. No, Mom. She did this herself. The agents collected everything, documents, devices, photographs. They sealed them into evidence bags. They spoke in low voices full of acronyms and protocols my family couldn't follow. My grandmother stepped forward, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. Daniel, she said, are you in trouble? I shook my head. No, Ruth. It's over. But it wasn't. Not yet. They escorted Emily to a cruiser, not the black SUVs, but Holt's vehicle. She kept looking back at me, disbelief and betrayal warring in her eyes. You could have trusted me, she said hoarsely. I did, I replied. You just didn't trust me. Holt approached once she was secured. Sir, he said, I had no idea. If I'd known. You weren't supposed to, I said. That's how this works. He nodded. Internal Affairs will be notified. The department. I know, I said. Do your job. The SUVs pulled away as quietly as they'd arrived, taking the night's chaos with them. Ridgehaven slowly returned to silence. But nothing inside that house would ever be the same again. When I stepped back inside, my family parted like I was radioactive. My mother sat down heavily at the table. My uncle stared at the floor. My grandmother reached for my hand. I warned you, she said softly. But I knew this was the only way the truth would come out. I squeezed her hand. I'm sorry you had to see it. She shook her head. No. I'm sorry you lived it. I left that house before midnight. I didn't say goodbye. Some endings don't need words. And as I drove back toward the city lights, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. Emily hadn't just tried to arrest me. She'd destroyed her own life trying to prove I was someone I never was. By morning, Ridgehaven was awake in a way it hadn't been the night before. Not noisy, just alert. The kind of quiet where curtains move, phones buzz, and everyone suddenly knows something happened even if they don't yet know what. I didn't sleep. I sat in the guest room of a government safe house 2 towns over, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. Not the arrest itself, that part was procedural, almost boring once the truth surfaced, but Emily's face when Captain Holt saluted me. That moment hadn't just shocked her. It had cracked something fundamental inside her. At 6:14 a.m., my secure phone rang. Superintendent Mercer, a calm voice said. This is Director Lawson, Office of Federal Compliance and Inspectorate. We need a full debrief. Immediately. I expected that, I replied. I'm ready. Good. Transportation will arrive in 20. When the black sedan pulled up, I took one last look at the quiet street. This was supposed to be a short visit. A Christmas dinner. An obligation checked off a list. Instead, it had detonated years of resentment, ambition, and silence. The ride to Fort Ashland took 90 minutes. Long enough for the weight of everything to settle. In the conference room, there were no raised voices. No drama. Just questions. Precise ones. When did Officer Mercer begin investigating you? Approximately 6 weeks ago. Did you suspect family involvement? Yes. Why didn't you preemptively disclose? Because disclosure would have compromised ongoing operations and validated an abuse of authority before it was provable. They nodded. They understood. This wasn't their first time seeing ego weaponized into procedure. Director Lawson folded his hands. She accessed restricted interagency metadata without clearance. That alone is grounds for termination. I know. She initiated an unlawful arrest of a senior federal official. I know. And she involved civilians. I closed my eyes briefly. I know. There was a pause. Do you wish to file a personal grievance? That question lingered. I thought of Emily at our kitchen table years ago, laughing, teasing me about how serious I always was. I thought of the night she came home exhausted from patrol, dropping her boots by the door while I cooked. I thought of the way she used to say she liked that I didn't need attention. No, I said finally. I want the record to reflect facts only. No embellishment. Lawson studied me for a moment, then nodded. Very well. Administrative action will proceed. By noon, the machinery had started turning. Emily was placed on immediate suspension pending investigation. Her badge and service weapon were confiscated. Internal Affairs arrived before noon. The State Oversight Board followed. By evening, it was no longer quiet. My phone buzzed non-stop. Unknown numbers. Voicemails. Messages from family members who hadn't spoken to me in years. My mother left 4 voicemails in a row. First disbelief. Then anger. Then pleading. Then silence. My grandmother was the only one who didn't call. She texted instead. I'm proud of you. I always was. I just didn't know how to say it. That message hit harder than anything else. 3 days later, I was asked to give a sworn statement. I did. I didn't defend myself. I didn't accuse Emily. I simply explained how the badge worked, how jurisdiction worked, how federal oversight functioned. I laid out timelines, access logs, procedures. Facts are devastating when people expect emotions. The press got hold of it by day 5. Not my name, thankfully, that remained sealed, but local officer arrests federal superintendent at family gathering made the rounds fast. The department released a carefully worded statement. Emily's name was redacted. Ridgehaven knew anyway. By the end of the week, her cruiser was gone from its reserved spot in front of town hall. Captain Holt called me personally. "I want you to hear this from me," he said. "She's finished here. Regardless of the investigation outcome." I assumed as much, I replied. "She crossed lines that can't be uncrossed." "Yes," I said. "She did." There was hesitation on the line. "For what it's worth?" "I'm sorry." "I know," I said. "You did what you could." That night, I sat alone in my apartment in D.C., surrounded by a life Emily had never fully seen. Awards in drawers. Classified binders locked away. A world built on restraint. I poured a drink and didn't touch it. I kept thinking about something she'd said months earlier. "You don't have to be so mysterious, Daniel. You're not that important." She had meant it jokingly. But she'd believed it. The investigation moved fast after that. Emily had used her position to request off-book database searches. She'd framed them as internal verification checks. She'd convinced a junior clerk to pull partial files she shouldn't have had access to. She'd leaned on rank. On confidence. On being right. The investigator assigned to her case didn't know her personally. That helped. By week 3, the findings were clear. Misuse of authority. Unauthorized surveillance. False arrest. Federal interference. Her attorney reached out to mine. "She wants to speak with you," he said. "Off the record." I declined. A few days later, she showed up anyway. Not at my apartment. At my office. Security stopped her before she reached the elevator. I watched her on the camera feed. She looked smaller. Not physically, just diminished. Like the weight she'd carried as identity had vanished. I authorized them to let her up. She stood in my doorway, eyes red, hands clenched. "I didn't know," she said immediately. "I swear to you, Daniel, I didn't know who you really were." "I told you who I was," I replied calmly. "Just not the parts you wanted to use. You lied by omission." "No," I said. "I enforced a boundary." She laughed bitterly. "You let me destroy myself." I leaned back in my chair. "You didn't trust me. You didn't ask questions. You made assumptions and built a case to fit them." Her voice cracked. "I was trying to prove something." "I know," I said. "That's why this happened." She took a step closer. "They're going to charge me." "Yes." "They might revoke my certification." "Yes." "I could lose everything." I met her eyes. "You already did." That finally broke her. She sank into the chair opposite my desk and covered her face. "I wanted to matter," she whispered. "I wanted to be right." "You mattered," I said softly. "You just confused power with truth." She stayed for 10 minutes. She cried. She apologized. I accepted neither blame nor reconciliation. When she left, I felt no triumph. Only exhaustion. 2 weeks later, the charges were filed. Not criminal, yet. Administrative. Federal review pending. Her career was effectively over. Ridgehaven replaced her with a temporary transfer. My mother stopped calling. My uncle sent a message accusing me of destroying the family. I didn't reply. Because families aren't destroyed by truth. They're destroyed by lies people refuse to outgrow. I went back to work. Briefings. Strategy. Quiet influence. But something had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't carrying the weight of being misunderstood. The silence felt lighter now. And I knew the hardest part still hadn't arrived. Because consequences don't end when the paperwork is filed. They end when people finally understand what they've lost. The official letter arrived on a Wednesday morning, slipped under my door like a quiet verdict. Notice of Federal Administrative Determination. I didn't need to open it to know what it said. I already felt the outcome in the silence that followed Emily's visit, in the way her attorney stopped calling, in how Ridgehaven suddenly pretended I'd never existed. Still, I opened it. The language was clinical. Cold. Final. Emily Mercer was formally terminated from the Ridgehaven Police Department, effective immediately. Her law enforcement certification was suspended pending permanent revocation. Federal review had concluded that her actions constituted gross abuse of authority, unlawful detention, and willful interference with federal operations. No appeal rights were granted. I sat down on the edge of my bed and let the paper rest in my hands. This was the part no one ever shows you in stories like this, the quiet after the explosion. No shouting. No dramatic music. Just consequences settling into place, one line at a time. By that afternoon, the news reached my family. My mother finally called. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. "You didn't have to let it go this far," she said. Not angry. Just tired. I closed my eyes. "I didn't let anything happen," I replied. "I didn't start this." "She's your wife." "She was," I corrected gently. "And she made a choice." There was a pause. I could hear her breathing. "You always do this," she said finally. "You disappear when things get hard." "No," I said. "I disappear when people decide I'm the enemy instead of listening." Another pause. Then, quietly, "Your father would have hated this." That hurt. Not because it was true, but because she believed it. "My father taught me accountability," I said. "Not excuses." She didn't respond. The line went dead. I didn't call back. That night, I poured myself a drink and stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere in Ridgehaven, Emily was packing up the remnants of a life she thought was permanent. A house she believed she controlled. A reputation she'd built on certainty. I wondered if she finally understood the difference between authority and arrogance. 3 days later, my grandmother called. She didn't ask questions. She didn't lecture. She just said, "Come see me." I drove down that weekend. Her house looked the same, small, neat, stubbornly untouched by time. She opened the door before I knocked. "You look tired," she said. "So do you," I replied. She smiled faintly and pulled me into a hug that lingered longer than usual. We sat at her kitchen table with tea between us. No police photos. No uniforms. No folders. "I knew," she said suddenly. "Knew what?" "That she'd do something like this," she replied. "Not the arrest. But the need to win. She always needed to win." I stared into my cup. "Why didn't you say anything?" She sighed. "Because you wouldn't have listened. And because some lessons can't be taught. They have to happen." That sounded familiar. "She loved you," my grandmother added. "In her way. I know. She just loved power more." We sat quietly for a while. Then she reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. "You didn't ruin this family," she said firmly. "You revealed it." That was the moment something inside me finally unclenched. The divorce papers were straightforward. Emily didn't contest them. She didn't fight for assets or reputation or narrative. She signed quietly. We never met again. The house sold within 2 months. I kept my distance from Ridgehaven after that. No victory lap. No explanations. Let them tell their own version. The Federal Review wrapped up shortly afterward. A final report, sealed and archived. My name remained protected. My position unchanged. If anything, my superiors trusted me more. "You handled it clean," Director Lawson told me. "A lot of people wouldn't have." "I didn't do it for approval," I replied. "I know," he said. "That's why it mattered." Work resumed its familiar rhythm. Briefings before dawn. Strategy sessions. Long days that ended without applause. But something was different. I stopped minimizing myself. Not out of spite, but because I no longer needed to. When people asked what I did, I answered plainly. No mystery. No deflection. I'd spent years shrinking to keep peace with people who only respected control. I wasn't doing that anymore. The last I heard about Emily came through a mutual acquaintance. She'd moved out of state. Was working private security, under supervision. No badge. No gun. No authority. Just rules. I didn't feel satisfaction when I heard that. Only closure. Some people mistake restraint for weakness. Some confuse silence with submission. And some believe authority means never being questioned. They're always the most shocked when the truth finally speaks. That Christmas, I spent the holiday alone. No Ridgehaven. No family table. Just a quiet apartment, a simple meal, and a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I raised my glass, not in celebration, but acknowledgement. To boundaries. To truth. To the cost of pretending. And to the freedom that comes when you stop explaining yourself to people who were never listening. I didn't lose a wife that year. I lost an illusion. And I gained myself. The final paperwork was signed on a grey Monday morning, the kind of day that feels intentionally bland, like the world is trying not to influence your emotions. Dissolution of marriage, finalized. No ceremony. No argument. No witnesses beyond 2 attorneys who treated it like a real estate transfer. That was it. After years of being married to a woman whose identity was built on authority, control, and certainty, our entire life together ended in 12 signatures and 1 quiet nod. I walked out of the building and didn't look back. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt light. Not happy. Not relieved. Just unburdened. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. No dramatic fallout. No sudden apologies. No heroic redemption arc. Just space. And space, I learned, is dangerous if you've spent your whole life avoiding it. Without Emily, without Ridgehaven, without the constant pressure of managing other people's expectations, there was nothing left to distract me from myself. So I did something I'd never really allowed before. I slowed down. I took real leave. Not working remotely leave. Not I'll still check messages leave. Actual time off. I rented a small place near the coast, far from bases, offices, and flags. No uniforms. No credentials. Just a key, a grocery store, and a view of water that didn't care who I was. The first few days were uncomfortable. I kept waking up early, instinctively reaching for a phone that didn't need checking. I paced. I cleaned things that were already clean. I stood at the window like I was waiting for orders. Old habits die hard. But by the end of the first week, something shifted. I started sleeping. Really sleeping. I cooked instead of reheating. I read books that had nothing to do with leadership, conflict, or geopolitics. I ran in the mornings without tracking time or distance. I existed. And that terrified me more than any arrest ever had. Because when you strip away rank, secrecy, and responsibility, you're left with one question that can't be dodged. Who are you when no one is watching? For most of my life, I defined myself by function. By usefulness. By necessity. Son who didn't fit. Brother who left. Officer who endured. Leader who absorbed impact so others didn't have to. But stripped of all that? I was just a 37-year-old man who'd spent most of his life reacting instead of choosing. That realization hit harder than Emily's betrayal ever did. My therapist noticed the shift immediately. "You're grieving," she said during one session. "I'm not," I replied automatically. "I'm free." She nodded. Those two things aren't opposites. That stayed with me. Because she was right. I wasn't just grieving my marriage. I was grieving the version of myself who believed silence would eventually be rewarded. Who thought if I stayed disciplined enough, calm enough, accommodating enough, people would finally see me. That kid deserved better. And so did the man I'd become. About 2 months later, I got an unexpected message. From Emily. Not a call. Not a letter. An email. Short. Carefully worded. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't ask to meet. She just wrote. "I understand now that I wasn't trying to protect anyone. I was trying to prove I mattered. I'm sorry for the damage I caused. I hope you're well." I read it once. Then again. Then I closed the laptop. I didn't reply. Not out of anger. Not out of spite. But because closure doesn't always require conversation. Sometimes it requires restraint. And I'd finally learned that lesson. Ridgehaven faded from my life the way small towns always do, slowly, then all at once. I heard rumors. Emily moved again. The department reorganized. People argued about what really happened. None of it mattered. Truth doesn't need consensus. It just needs time. My grandmother passed away the following spring. Peacefully. In her sleep. I attended the service quietly, seated in the back. No uniforms. No announcements. Just a man honoring the only person who ever saw him clearly without demanding he explain himself. Afterward, a few relatives approached me. Awkward. Careful. They didn't apologize. They didn't accuse. They just nodded. That was enough. I left Ridgehaven for the last time that evening, driving out as the sun dipped behind the hills. I didn't feel sadness. I felt completion. Today, my life looks very different. I still serve, but on my terms. I consult more than I command. I mentor instead of disappear. I choose transparency where secrecy isn't required, and boundaries where it is. I no longer shrink to keep others comfortable. I no longer explain myself to people who've already decided who I am. And I no longer confuse love with loyalty to silence. The irony is this. The night my wife arrested me at Christmas dinner was supposed to humiliate me. Instead, it clarified everything. It showed me exactly how fragile authority becomes when it's built on ego. How dangerous certainty is when it's fueled by insecurity. And how powerful calm can be when it's backed by truth. I didn't win that night. I didn't lose either. I woke up. And sometimes, that's the most decisive outcome there is. If you've ever been underestimated, misjudged, or forced to defend a truth you were never allowed to speak, remember this. You don't owe clarity to people who prefer control. You don't owe access to people who abuse authority. And you don't owe silence to anyone who mistakes it for weakness. Before you go, if this story resonated with you, consider supporting the channel, leave a comment about where you're watching from, and subscribe so these stories can reach others who might need to hear them. Some truths take time to surface. But when they do, they change everything.